When visualizing my project in Revit, I use Enscape. Enscape is a real-time rendering software that offers quick turnaround renderings for client presentations. I also use Enscape as a way for me to visualize my own project in order to make design updates to help drive efficiency and workflow throughout the design process. In this video, I will show you how I use Enscape with Revit as a tool to iterate and to create quick renderings to visualize my own project. This video is meant to be as a guide for those who use Revit and would like to produce rendering more efficiently. As with any guide, there are timestamps in this video that you can use to jump to the parts that you need. But of course, you could always watch the whole video to understand the complete workflow. And if you don't already have Enscape installed and interested in trying the program, there is a 14-day free trial. I started using Enscape back in 2019 as a design and rendering tool for bigger projects while I work at a larger architecture firm. Since then, Enscape has released multiple improvements and updates. In this tutorial, I will use the latest Enscape, which is version 4.1. And before we jump into Enscape, I want to quickly talk about the system requirements to make sure that Enscape will run smoothly in your computer. You will need to meet the required and host application for Revit. You can use Enscape with Revit 2022 to 2025. Here you also have the specific system requirement, both the minimum and the recommended for your computer. I will put the link in the description for the system requirements for PC. Right now, when producing my Enscape rendering, I use the Omen HP laptop with RTX 4050 GPU GeForce with 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 13th generation Intel Core processor, which works and runs Enscape pretty smoothly. With that, let's jump into the model in Revit. And if you want to see the design process on how I developed the design of this project, check out the previous episode in this video series. I use Enscape as a tool to produce real-time renderings with Revit. And since the last video, I have developed and updated the design and model of the project. First, I want to show you how I use Enscape as a design tool to update and iterate my design. So after you install Enscape in Revit, you should have the Enscape tab. And to export a quick image, click Start. This should launch the Enscape viewport. To export an image of your project view, in the Enscape toolbar, click the screenshot icon. You can also do a batch rendering if you have multiple views you want to export. But for now, let's just export this one view that I'm going to use to update my design. As you can see, this is a quick way to produce images of your project. And if you're like me and like to sketch when designing, this process works as an efficient way to export an image of your Revit model and start sketching on top of it. After I export my image, I like to use Morpholio Trace app. This functions as a digital trace paper. This saves me time from printing and scanning, but still gives me that ability to sketch on top of my design. What's nice about Enscape while you're updating the model in Revit, you can see the updated rendering view in real time. So if you have two monitors, you can have each of the program on a separate monitor. But if you don't, you can just have both the Revit model and Enscape views side by side in a single monitor, and that works just fine as well. If you do not want your Revit model to update while having Enscape open, maybe because your Revit file is heavy or you have a lot of asset in your model, you can always pause the live updates in the control button in your ribbon. And then you can later on synchronize your view when you're done modeling in Revit. Now let's go back to Enscape. To access all your 3D view, click the View Management icon, or F in your keyboard for shortcut. This will show all the 3D views in your project. This is also where you create new views. To adjust the view, you can use the WASD in your keyboard to move and your mouse button to orbit and pan. You can click the Help button or type H to view all the controls you need to adjust your views. The first thing that I do when starting a rendering is to establish the rendering view of the image. This allows me to focus on the rendering view and create the scene and add the appropriate entourage so that I don't have to model beyond what I need to. Here in the Create View panel, you can also adjust the position of the camera manually and the position of the sun. The azimuth is the angle of the horizontal deviation measured clockwise of bearing from the standard south direction, while the altitude is the angular elevation of the sun above the horizon. In the View Management, you also have the option to toggle Export Geometry. When disabled, this means that the geometry will not be reloaded each time you switch between views. One thing to keep in mind when creating your rendering view is to adjust the projection mode. As a default, Enscape view are projected into perspective mode. Be aware that this perspective mode will distort your vertical lines. In architectural representation, more specifically renderings and photography, typically you will want to make sure that all your verticals are straight. To do that, you will need to adjust the projection mode to 2-point perspective. Also, know that you have the option of projecting to orthographic, which is best used when creating diagrammatic drawings for your projects. Now let's jump into materials. Enscape has its own material library, which you can access here in the Enscape ribbon, which you can add and use in your own project. To apply Enscape material into your existing Revit materials, all you need to do is go to the material editor, select the material you want to replace, and now you can select from a number of Enscape material which comes render ready. This is a fast way to apply a more realistic material into your model. You can also use the Enscape material editor to adjust any of your materials in Revit manually. Here you can select the type of material. For this video, I will select default as it is the most common type. Here you can add the material texture, and if you click on the image, you can adjust the scale appropriately to your model. In the height map, you can add the bump and displacement map, which adds a realism effect to your material. And to add even more realism, you can add the roughness texture. To apply the material in your Revit model, for example, an exterior finish for your wall assembly, you will need to click the wall you want to adjust. In the Properties panel, click Edit Type. It is always best practice to duplicate the type you're editing. Under Construction, click Edit Structure. Here it will show you the assembly of the wall type you selected. Click on the material to adjust the finish material, Here in the material browser, you can select and apply the desired Enscape material for your rendering. And those are the basic things you need to know about Enscape materials to get started with your renderings. Now let's jump into Enscape Asset Library. In Revit, you can access all the Enscape asset by clicking this Asset Library icon in your Enscape ribbon. However, I find that it is better to add your entourage and vegetation inside the Enscape viewport, which has additional features and controls. So in the Enscape viewport, you can click the same asset icon or hit L for a shortcut. Here you can see all the Enscape assets, which you can filter based on categories. You can also modify each asset using these controls, and also the type of asset placement, single or multiple placement. So let's go ahead and select a tree to add to our view. Type tree in the search bar or select tree in the categories. You can further refine the type of tree by clicking this tag button. For now, let's select this one and place it in our Enscape view. Then click Apply Change, and the same asset will instantly appear in the Revit model as well. We can adjust any asset by clicking it. You can click this Translate button, and it will give you the gumball. And now you can move the tree to the X, Y, and Z direction. You can also use this to rotate the tree. You can also adjust the scale of the tree by clicking this button. And now you can easily adjust the size of the asset that works for your view. But if you want to populate an area in your view with multiple assets, you can select different assets at the same time by selecting multiple asset placement. So let's select all these trees. You have different ways of placing multiple assets: rectangular, circular, or bucket. You can also adjust the width of the placement. And here you can adjust the density or the amount of trees in your placement and the type of distribution. For vegetation, we typically will want it to appear random rather than uniform. You can always preview the selected area and how they would look like in your view. And if you're not happy with the distribution, you can regenerate to create new variations. And once you're satisfied with your placement, you can click this Confirm button. One major thing to keep in mind when you add asset in Enscape Viewport is that it also adds the geometry into your Revit model. For your drawings, make sure that you hide all the Enscape assets in the visibility graphics. Somehow all the Enscape assets are categorized as planting, including people and furniture, so make sure that you have that category unchecked. Otherwise, all the assets will be visible in your architectural drawings, and typically that is not something that we will want in our drawings. For better workflow in Enscape, in this visual setting window, you can click this arrow. Now you can create your own preset that you can apply to your own views. Here you can adjust the style mode for different types of rendering. If you want to just show the model without any materials, you can set it to white or polystyrol. You can also set it to light view or sketch or watercolor, which is a new feature in Enscape 4.1 if you want a more stylistic type of renderings. But for this tutorial, I will set it to none. Under Style, you can also adjust the outline. For camera, Let's set it to 2-point perspective to keep our verticals vertical. You can either have auto or manual exposure for adjustments. Field of view. This is your camera lens. I like to set it to a wide angle. Don't be afraid to be more creative in your view. I like to set up my rendering views similar to how I photograph architecture, which I use a wide angle lens. Depth of field is the range of distance in front of and behind a lens focal point that appears sharp in an image. You can either autofocus or manually adjust the focal point. These adjustments provide a bokeh effect in your rendering, which is a soft and out of focus background while keeping the subject into focus, which you will typically see in photographs. This setting will give your rendering a photographic feel to it. Lastly, you can define the rendering quality of your image from draft to all the way to ultra quality. To not bog down my computer, I like to keep it to medium while modeling. And if you have an older computer, it will be best to keep it at draft quality. Under the image tab, you can further adjust the color and effect of your rendering. For image correction, however, I like to do that in post using Photoshop. So I will leave it to auto contrast. For effects, I like to keep it at minimal. Under atmosphere, here you can adjust the environment of your setting for fog. I also like to keep this as minimal as well. For sun brightness, keep it under 20%. And shadow sharpness to 0%. Artificial and ambient brightness are mostly applied for interior renderings. Width is when you're creating a video inside Enscape, which I can show you in a future video. Under sky, here you can adjust the type of horizon and context that gives you control of the clouds in your view. Or change it to white if you would rather add the sky in post. Skybox allows you to add HDRI images, which you can download for free from websites such as Polygon and Polyhaven. But for this rendering, I will just use one of the preset horizon to desert, since the site of the project is located in Southern California. Lastly, in this visual setting, in the Output tab, you will want to adjust the resolution of your rendering output. You can select any of the preset and can even create your own custom frame view. I would recommend turning on the Save Frame, which is located in the upper right of the Enscape viewport. Here, you can limit the visible area to the projected rendering result. I also typically check this export object ID, material ID, depth channel, and alpha channel, which comes in handy when doing post-processing in Photoshop. You can also select the file format of your export and the location where it will be saved. It's also best to have automatic naming checked to save you some time. But before we hit render, let's go back to the main tab and I will adjust the rendering quality to high. Another nice thing about the new update in Enscape 4.1, it has this AI enhancer, which adds another layer of realism to your rendering, if that is something that you're interested in. Now we're ready. Now let's go ahead and export the rendering view. Let's do some quick post-processing edit in Photoshop. What's nice about using Enscape is that you don't have to do much editing to enhance your rendering, just minor touch-up. In Photoshop, Under File, go to Script, then click Load File into Stack. Now you can add the rendering export from Enscape and the material ID and the object ID, as well as the depth and alpha channels. For this rendering, I only need the main rendering and the material and object ID. Typically, I enhance my presentation rendering how I process photographs. So under File, let's select Camera Raw, and let's just do a minor adjustment. Sometimes I use a preset setting that I've already created to save me some time. And there you have it. Now we quickly generated a presentation-ready rendering with a model we built in Revit using Enscape with minimal effort and time. Hopefully, that helps you get started with Enscape as an additional tool to use with Revit to quickly generate high-quality images to use in your design process or rendering images you can present to your clients. If you want to continue to follow along with the progress of the project or would like to see more architecture tutorials and content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, share, and leave a comment. I appreciate any support for the channel. For the next episode of this series, I will continue sharing my design process and show you how I developed the drawing set for this accessory dwelling project using Revit.